right, so we are just trying to explore how we can work with our school interface so that we can, see some student data, but also write to it. So in this case, my current example is using depth equals 1. This is kind of the easiest way to kind of give you nested relationships that have the nested data, but this makes it read-only, meaning I cannot write to it. So let's explore some ways we can get around this, where we can still see additional information, but not have to be read-only. So students, again, string related field is not going to give us that capability. This will provide us useful information when we're getting the request. So we see the student name, that's using the str method of your model, but we can't post to it. So when I create Donuts 101, I can't add students right away. Okay, so to get around that, there's a couple suggestions. So Stephen came up with, or he found 2 representation. That is a good approach here. So his solution, I think, had some extra layers on top of it. We could ask him for the details there. But reading documentation, if we, in our serializer, add a method. So this is similar to what Stephen did, called toRepresentation. It has to be named this because that is what's coming from model serializer. So we're overriding it. And notice what VS Code actually did here. I actually didn't do this. I was surprised VS Code did this for me, but it created my stub method here where we're calling the base class with the parameter here. So normally this is what you want to do when you override a method. You normally want to call the base class unless you have a reason not to. So in this case, we are using the super method, which is going to automatically call our base class to representation and pass any variables that was passed to us. But here we want to do something additional. So here we can do self.fields, right? So we have a field of students. So that's what we're going to be manipulating. toRepresentation, this is used, I think documentation will have a better description for it, but used for output, right? So this won't be used for when we're writing to this, when we're serializing, like to write with the serializer, but it will be used when we're reading from it. So here, students is the field I want, right? Because that's the name here. And then we could do something like students serializer, many equals true. All right, so what this will do is actually use our serializer to deserialize only for output. So the cool thing about this is that for input, we can still use IDs. So if I go back here and refresh, everything's cool. Notice we get our student info. So that's part 1 of what we wanted. When we do a GET request, we get the student details. Part 2 is, well, that's not what I want, but okay. So part 2 is, can we write to this? And the answer is yes, but I'm not sure why the API tells us no. So let's actually go to Postman or school interface. Let's go with a new course. All right, so this is my old data. Let's update it. So I want to go to school API courses. And we need a post to it. So it's be a post request to courses. This is not the data I want. What data do I want? I want name and students are the only 2 things that I want. So I'm going to copy that. Let's see if this actually works or if I need to go back to the drawing board. All right, so we're going to add a new class. It will be called Donuts 101. Donuts 101. We don't provide all this data for students. All we need is the ID. So let's put maybe 2 students enrolled in here. So we'll do student 2, student 3. So that should be Bill and Cindy. Alice is not part of Donuts 101. Okay, so let's see if this works. I'm sending a name and students value because that's what my model has in it. ID, we do not send. ID is automatically resolved when this item gets created in my database. So that's not what I send. All right, so I have posts. I have my endpoint of courses, JSON data. I think I have everything I want. Let's see if this actually works. All right, we got an error. That's not good.
Could the problem be you still have that string only or string related field?
Oh, do I still have that? I got rid of that. Oh, yeah, sorry. That's not what I want. Thank you. So yeah, I don't want that string related field. That was making that read only. Does that fix this? All right, cool. That fixed my API too. Thank you for pointing that out. Totally missed that. So notice that now I get my output as like detailed data, but I can still send a post request with these items. So that's what I was trying to do in Postman. We do that here too, but let's actually do it in Postman because That's a better example of us actually sending a request to our API. So if I do send here, all right, notice that my course got created. I got a response here. So I got ID 4, Donuts 101, and I got the student information sent back to me. So this is the easiest way where you could send IDs, because that is the appropriate thing you want to send. You don't want to send like a whole student object when you're kind of creating a course. Because again, the details of that student don't matter. The only thing that matters is the association, which is the ID. So here, if I refresh my page here, we should get our 4th course. So we do have Donuts 101 with Bill and Cindy enrolled. Alice is not part of it. One additional thing that kind of bugs me, I don't know if it bugs you, is that we also have a nested courses here, right? Like we have a course name, and then we can see every other course the student's in. That might be like extra information that we don't want, right? We only care about like maybe the student name. So can we control that? Well, yes, the answer is yes. So another question that came up was, can we have multiple serializers for the same type of data? And the answer is yes. So here we have our student serializer. Well, what if I make another serializer for my student model? Well, this one I'll call students without courses, just to be explicit. Here, this serializer will only serve up the ID and name. So with that in place, I'm using this because I don't want courses output in my course detail, as in the student's courses. So here, student without courses will serialize only the ID and name. So if I make this change, notice right now, my course details, again, it's kind of gross because it's like very nested, right? I have one level here, then a second level, then a third level within here. I don't want to see courses here. I only care about the current course and what student I have in it. I don't care about what other courses that student might be in. So now with that change I just made with the serializer, notice that I only see the name and ID. So again, this is answering the question of, can you have multiple serializers working with the same data? Totally yes. You could have as many serializers as you wish, depending on your use cases. So that allows us to do that. So then that's one way to do it. Again, this was reading documentation. Stephen kind of pointed us in the right direction, where we need to override the toRepresentation method. And then for the students field, we want to specify what serializer to use to actually output that data. Again, this is only for output, not for input. So for input, as in when we're writing or creating or updating our course data, we can send IDs, and that is what we want to send. We don't want to send names, we want to send IDs. Any questions about what we did here? So again, the main change was adding a method, a couple lines of code, nothing too complicated, and that achieves writing with IDs and reading with like full data. What questions do you guys have?
I think I'm a little bit confused, and it's probably just me and my unfamiliarity with like JSON structures. But when you have, so it's students is just an array, like it seems odd to me that you don't need to put brackets around each of the ID numbers, I guess. But I don't know. Like when you were doing that post in Postman,
Yeah.
and you're just able to make the array and then just add a 1 and a 2,
Yep.
those are just being read as like their own separate objects.
Yeah, it's just a list of keys or an array of keys, and then Django is going to look up those values and make sure that the association exists. But yeah, in that case, yeah, we don't have a dictionary because all we need is IDs, so it's going to be just an array of IDs. Yeah, it's not going to be an ID with a value in it. It already knows that the number in there is a primary key. So we yesterday at Sandown I tried to introduce primary key related field. That is actually the default way these fields are handled. If you don't specify like string related field or anything else. So doing that was kind of just excessive. Primary key related field is a default way your foreign keys will be handled. And that just kind of means an ID and everything else will work.
Thank you, Alker.
Another question that came up, were there any questions about this method? So again, took some digging. Again, Stephen pointed us the right direction. toRepresentation. If you're curious more about it, there's documentation that can tell you exactly what it does. I kind of simplified it and it's just say, anytime we're outputting something, this method gets called with the instance, and then you can do whatever you need to. So we're overriding like students, the way we deserialize students, and we call the base class to do the rest of the functionality for us.
I have students page.
Daniel, your audio is a bit choppy.
Oh my God.
I catch that.
1 second.
Sounds a little better now, though. Onto the headphones.
Yeah, I gotta give. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, I gotta give up those headphones. So yeah, so when you go to your students page, like in your local host, maybe this doesn't matter, but like now you see like each student and then the courses they're taking, and then it's also still listing like the students within the courses they're taking. Oh wait, never mind. That's
Yeah,
just
so that is if we use depth. So we use depth for our students. Let's try that. So the student serializer, I'm going to do depth equals 1.
yeah. I still had depth in, so that's why mine was doing that.
Yeah, so again, we get the nesting. So we do the same thing on the student serializer if we wanted to have something like courses. Let's get more tabs. That's how we use browsers these days, courses. So here, again, much easier. I would say easier to read because again, we don't have like the nesting within nesting within nesting. We just have, students and then the nested data if we wanted it. Again, this is if you need it. Normally ID should be good enough, but sometimes you do want that extra piece of data. So it is possible. Another question that someone else had was, what if I want to save data using a name? Now we talked about this, like it's not a good idea because names can be duplicated, right? There are probably multiple Dan Millers out there, probably multiple, a lot of, there's 7 billion people on this planet, probably someone else with your name, unless you have a super unique name. So normally you do not want to save by name, but it is possible. So I think this was Guillermo's question, like, hey, I want to save by name. It is possible, not recommended, but if we want to do that, we can introduce another type of field. And a lot of this is just reading documentation. We've said this over and over. There's something called Slug related field. I've never really used this. So if you want to do students equals Slug related field, that should be imported for us. So there it is. I guess I should move this back. Slug related field. You guys can read more about that. But again, slugs are just textual representation of data. So it's not JSON. It's just like a title that can be used to, maybe I'm butchering this, but this just deals with strings. But string related field is read only. Slug related field lets you read and write. So to do this, we need to say many equals true because it's still a many to many relationship. Again, I'm just doing this just to answer the question. Normally, you're not going to be doing this, so we don't need to get too involved in here. We need to provide a query set. Again, whenever you're writing, it needs a query set so we can look up some items. So in this case, we'll use students.objects.all. And the last thing is how you actually look up a particular value. So this is specific to a slug related field. So a slug field, and then what value on the student model is going to be used when we send a string. So if we send like a name, then we're going to look up a value by name. So it's going to match the field. So instead of providing an ID, which is the normal correct way to do it, sorry, when I say correct, like the typical way to do it, if you have a use case where you want to save values by name, as in add students by name, you can do it this way with a slug related field. So here we are saying this is a many to many relationship. We need to provide a query set, as in what data does the students field use? And then finally, how do we look up students? In this case, we're using name instead of ID. So with this, we should be able to do what we want. So if I refresh this, we're back to our depth, I think. We have depth here, I'm not sure what it's doing. But if I want to save by student name, let's go back to our Postman. So here we create a new class called donuts. Let's go with an E. Let's go with epidermal. I can't spell. That ain't anywhere close. Epiderm. Anyone have a better E class? Can't spell.
Economics.
Yes, much better. I can spell economics. Pretty sure I can spell it. Economics. Okay. All right, so economics 102. Let's add students. But now, instead of providing IDs, we only can provide names because that's what we specified in a serializer. Again, we got multiple serializers to handle multiple cases. Here, we got to provide, let's say, Alice will be one student and Bill will be the second student. So again, these are student names, not IDs, but our slug related field will be able to look at the name, match the name on the student field. So it's going to look through all of our records, look through the name field and find one that has Alice as the name. And that's how we'll associate it properly. for this relationship. So if I save this, let's see if it actually works. All right, notice that Bill and Alice are now members of Economics 102. So I go back to my courses page, courses, refresh. All right, economics, we have Alice and Bill. This is actually referring to the students, like it might just look like strings. Well, if we switch this back, like let's get rid of this Slug related field and just have what we had before, refresh, notice we have actual IDs for the students. All right, so this is just answering a question. What if I want to save by name? It is possible, not recommended, but you are capable of doing that with Django and model serializers. The last thing I want to go over, sorry if this is kind of boring or not really point worthy, I just want to show, what options we have here. So another thing I came up with, like this two representation, I think is the simplest way of going about it. But what if we want to control the output and input? Well, there's two internal value, which we can use. Another option that is a little less elegant, but something that I think is something worthwhile going over. In our view set, we are specifying the serializer class that is used for that view set. In this case, it's always going to be course serializer. But what if I wanted to make that a little more dynamic? So again, a lot of this is reading documentation. So documentation, name of the game. If I want to make this a little more dynamic, we can do that. So here, instead of specifying the serializer class, we're going to create a method called get serializer class. Again, this might be, coming out of thin air or, out of nowhere. This is sort of a reserved method name. It's matching this value here. So serializer class is the name of the field that we're getting. Put a get before it, underscore, and this is Django will know how to use this. So this is kind of like, we don't have free range in what we want to name this. At this point, there might be other options. Let's customize the name. But in this case, whatever field we're trying to replace, we just create a method called get in the field name, and Django will appropriately look for it there. So instead of hard coding or like specifying one serializer, we can make this a little more dynamic. So here, this is an instance method, so we take in self. Now, reading documentation, self has a parameter called action. So this is coming from model view set. There's a few actions that might happen with your view set. One is list, and the second is self.action is retrieve. Where is this coming from? You guessed it, documentation. So let's find some documentation here. So drf view sets. All right, so view sets here. Let's okay, so notice that there's a list, there's a retrieve, there's also create, update, partial update, and destroy. These are the 6 main actions that a view set can undertake. You can override any of that functionality if you want to by the method, or you can kind of check the action and see what we're doing. So here, if we're listing or retrieving, that is our get request. In this case, I want to return course serializer. Let's call it course read serializer. So this is where we're doing get request. We're reading data. We do things one way. Otherwise, we can return course write serializer. And I sense I might be confusing some people, but let's just try to finish this and see if it makes sense. So again, now we're specifying 2 different types of serializers. These are serializers we're going to have to create. This is not any magical naming scheme I'm going with. It's just my personal naming scheme. But here, based on the action that this view set is doing, whether it's like a get request or a put patch post request, we can control what serializer is used. So here, if I go to my serializers, so I have my old serializers, let's create a couple new ones. So here, I'll create 2 new serializers. One's called course read, and the other is called course writes. Read, writes. And then I don't want to use 2 representation. Again, that's probably the easiest way to do it. So this example is probably unnecessary. But here, my read, let's say I want to make my read just a string related field. I can, let's do depth. Depth is fine enough, so I'll do depth equals 1. Again, depth makes nested relationship read only. So that's why I put in my read serializer. But for my right serializer, I'm just going to have what I had before. So I guess it's identical to my previous course serializer, which I now abandoned. All right, so writing, I'll use IDs because again, by default, the relationship here will be a primary key related field. For my read, I'm going to use depth, which will give me the nested data. So if I do it this way, I should go back to my views. I need to import, I guess I'm importing everything, so that should be fine. Let's see if this works. So refresh here. So notice in my output, I get names. Sorry, this is my depth. So I'm getting the nested relationship there. How's that actually working? I'm actually, we have depth. How does that know to use this and not this? All right, I'm not sure how it knows to use this method. We didn't specify that anywhere. Anyway, I will go over that point. But now if you're writing, we can still write with IDs. So if I go back to my Postman, I could create a new class with F, French 103. Again, we're going back to IDs. So just to prove this is working, I could do ID 3. Let's say only Cindy wants to be in French class. So French 103, students just Cindy. Send this. Notice we created our class using IDs, but our read still has the nested data here. So if I go back to my GET request, I get the more detailed response. So again, you have more control than you might initially think, where you can override functionality. So in this case, we overrode how to get the serializer class instead of saying, hey, just use one serializer every time. We're saying, well, okay, if you're doing specific actions, in this case, reading data, use our special read serializer. If we're writing data, as I'm doing like a put, patch, delete, use the write serializer. So that's some more control that we can add here. Okay, so again, I know that was confusing. I just wanted to go over some of the stuff from stand down that came up yesterday. Again, simplest answer I can give you is there's probably a way to do what you want to do. Documentation is going to be the answer. That's kind of how I came up with these solutions, doing some Googling, reading documentation, figuring out how to get what I want here. What questions you guys have about anything here? Again, it's not super relevant. Don't worry if you're like, I don't want to worry about this. That's fine. Just showing additional capabilities should you want it with your serializers. What questions you guys have here?
What does a depth equals 1 mean? Or what does a 1 mean for that?
I think again, I'm not the best with technical definitions. I think it's how deep it goes into this relationship. So this is 1 deep. If we did 2 deep, let's see if that actually, like, will that reflect back the courses is my question. So let's do depth here, depth there. Curious, let's find out. Refresh. All right, that didn't change anything. I wonder if, let's see, we're not seeing courses here. I'm not sure why. Let's get rid of this serializer. Does that do that for me? Or that automatically not nested? I'm not sure why courses are not showing up here. Because we do have courses in our student serializer here. We could add back our 2 representation. Let's try that. Yeah. Any other questions while we just mess around with this?
So if I understand correctly, we can add students to courses in the courses page, and we can also add courses to students in the students page. Is there ever a situation where you wouldn't want to do that because of, let's say, creating duplicate data or any other concerns like that, that you wouldn't want to do that?
I don't think you're gonna have duplicate data. I think that's normally how you want to do it. So if you remember our admin panel, which I probably don't have up right now. Let's see if I have that up. Admin panel. Do I have a super user? Maybe. Okay, I didn't register my student model. Almost. But if we were adding students, we would have the option to add courses right away. So that makes it easier on the user. Again, the only slight caveat there is you can't create new students and add them to a course all in one swoop. So they had to be existing students when you're creating a new course to enroll them. You can't do both. We can't say, all right, this is my new course, Donuts 101, and I'm going to create new student objects at the same time. That has to be done separately because the many-to-many, again, needs both those models to exist. yeah, there's no concerns. Again, that's probably preferred in most cases. If you need to do everything in one action, again, usually you just create your course and then after that, add your students to it, like in 2 different steps. But in this case, you can do it all in 1 step if you want to. What was I trying to do here? So I tried to override 2 representation. Let's see if that changed anything here. That blew up. Oh, that's not what I want. What I want here. Oh, I want self.fields. All right, gonna wrap this up because I assume most of you guys are bored with this, but just want to be over it. So let's see if this works. All right, we're trying to test out depth. Many is true. Okay, there we go. So depth equals 2. Notice it goes further down. So we're looking at courses, which is applied physics. We see the students in them. Well, the students themselves are enrolled in courses. So now we can see the course details for each course that the student is enrolled in. So we get 2 levels deep. If we did 3 levels, I wonder if we would see another letter here. Let's see if that works or if that breaks down at some point. I'm not sure if we might need a 2 representation like we have here in our course serializer and our student serializer. So I don't know if depth equals 3 will change this. Yeah, that doesn't change it. But if we had like the same thing for our students, that would show, again, like more and more nesting. Usually you don't need anything more than depth equals 1, I would imagine. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up because not the main material today.